Severe weather with the Power of 5 Doppler Network.
Today on Katie, a 4-year-old dead. A mother convicted of poisoning her son with salt.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Hannah Overton, guilty.
I was in shock. I hadn't done anything wrong.
Sentenced to life in prison.
She didn't call 911. That was the basis of a life sentence. Does that seem crazy to you?
A family torn apart.
There's not a day that I don't think that I've done something different.
Do you ever regret bringing Andrew into your home?
Her husband and 5 children say she's innocent.
I wasn't guilty of anything.
The 5-year fight to free Hannah Overton.
Imagine spending 5 years of a life sentence in prison for a crime you say you never committed. That is exactly what happened to a Texas mom, and her case has a lot of people wondering, was justice served, or is an innocent woman paying the price for a legal system gone awry? We sent Paula Ferris down to Texas to get the story.
My name's Hannah Overton, and I am at Lane Murray Prison in Gatesville, Texas. I was falsely accused of the murder of my son.
6 years ago, Hannah and her husband Larry welcomed a 4-year-old boy named Andrew into their family.
We knew that there were a lot of kids out there that didn't have, as we told our kids, mommies and daddies that loved them.
They were already parents to 4 biological children when they became foster parents to Andrew, a child who was born to a meth addict.
Your kid's Sunday school teacher advised you not to take him in.
Yes.
Why?
His behavioral issues. Because of his eating issues, he was eating things out of the trash can.
But despite those concerns and discovering that they were pregnant again, the Overtons decided to continue with the adoption process.
It was never a thought of how many children we had. It was a thought of, this little boy needs a home, and we have a home that we can share with him.
Soon after Andrew settled in with his new family, Hannah and Larry say they began noticing those strange behaviors they were once warned about.
He would try to eat the soap and shampoo, cat food, dog food, pick up cigarette butts or things like that off the floor and put them in his mouth.
Hannah claims she shared those concerns with Andrew's adoption supervisor, who suggested Andrew may have pica, a bizarre eating disorder.
She told me she would set up an appointment with a doctor to get that taken care of. And we were waiting on her to set up that appointment.
But 1 week later, their lives would take a drastic turn. Home after recovering from a recent car accident, Hannah says she fed Andrew and her other young son breakfast, then brought them to her bed so she could rest while the boys watched cartoons. She dozed off, and when she woke up, Andrew was gone.
When I went to find him, he was in the pantry with his hand in the spice rack. I took it away from him and put it back and don't even remember what it was that he had.
And then what happens?
He wanted something to eat, and he got upset because I told him we had to wait until Daddy and his brothers and sisters came home. And he went into his room and he pooped all over the place and spread it all over the walls and everything in a temper tantrum.
Hannah claims she finally gave in, feeding him leftover soup flavored with Zatarain's Creole seasoning. After finishing, Andrew again complained he was still hungry, so Hannah gave him more. Still unsatiated, Andrew threw another fit. So she said she gave him a sippy cup of water sprinkled with Zatarain's. After 20 minutes of uncontrollable tantrums, Andrew quieted down. And then, according to Hannah, he stumbled to the floor.
Andrew ended up throwing up. My first thought was that he threw up because of the fit he was throwing. He kept saying he was cold. I thought that he had some sort of stomach virus.
But as time went by, it was clear this wasn't just the flu.
He started breathing funny at that point, more kind of like he was having an asthma attack.
Instead of calling 911, Hannah and Larry say they drove Andrew's failing body to a nearby clinic. But just yards from medical help, Andrew stopped breathing. Hannah says she frantically performed CPR in the back seat of the car, but it was too late. Little Andrew fell into a coma. A day later, he died. Blood tests revealed Andrew had died of salt poisoning. The medical examiner determined the cause of death was homicide, and Hannah Overton was charged with capital murder. Prosecutors painted a picture of a pregnant and frustrated mother who did not love her foster child the way she loved her own biological children. Their theory, Hannah wanted a way out.
This case boils down to a woman who tortured a child. She forced him to have 23 teaspoons of hot pepper and then watching him die in agony for 2.5 hours.
Did you kill your foster child, Andrew Bird?
No.
Did you ever think about harming him in any way?
No.
Intentionally, unintentionally, did you ever harm him?
No.
But in the end, the jury sided with the prosecution.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Hannah Overton, guilty.
I was so shocked. I didn't even say goodbye to the kids in the morning. I didn't warn them in any way, shape, or form that I might not be back because I thought it was finally going to be over.
Paula, what were your overall impressions of Hannah Overton when you all met?
Well, first of all, she has maintained her innocence throughout. She has been steadfast. She is a woman of great faith. She's not bitter. And she holds Bible studies in prison. She told me, I once told God I would go anywhere. I just never imagined he would send me here.
Meanwhile, the prosecution portrayed her as a woman who was frustrated at her wits' end in dealing with this little boy who obviously was struggling and had issues. But in the course of reporting the story, you learned some things about her background.
Yes, in covering the case, I found out that she truly had a heart for kids and loved children, not just her own biological children. She was a missionary for at-risk kids during her youth, and then up until the time she had her own children, she was a private nurse, an in-home nurse for severely disabled children.
If she knew that Andrew had these issues, that he had severe behavioral problems, why didn't she get help for him sooner?
Andrew was still in this adoption process. He was in custody of the state, so legally they were not allowed to make any sort of doctor's appointments or specialists without the state's approval. Everything had to go through the state.
I understand the real issue the jury had is she didn't seek medical help for Andrew immediately. She didn't call 911.
Right. He was exhibiting the classic signs of the flu initially. He was vomiting and he had a fever. It wasn't until he had issues breathing that they took him to urgent care. But the jury had a choice between capital murder and an acquittal. There was no middle ground.
Meanwhile, she believes her defense team, her initial defense team, failed her. How so?
Well, this past April, her former counsel was on the stand during that second hearing and wept. They said, "We failed you miserably. There's not a day that doesn't go by that we don't wish that we could have done more." And probably the biggest thing that they didn't do was calling Dr. Michael Moritz, and he is the nation's leading expert on salt. They did not call him to the stand.
But they did call him to the stand for the second hearing, where there was new evidence. And even then, the judge didn't recommend a retrial, really, right?
The judge found no new findings and said he was unpersuaded by this alleged new evidence, denied her request for a new trial. And so today it stands in the hands of the court, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. That's where her freedom lies.
Obviously, this case got a tremendous amount of attention in Corpus Christi, Texas. How does the community feel about her guilt or innocence?
I think initially it really polarized the community. The community, as well as her church, raised about $1 million for her defense. She has a website that's run pro bono. She has 3 of the highest powered attorneys in the state of Texas working for her pro bono. They are not getting paid. And her attorney actually told me this morning that back in April, during that second hearing, one of the local television stations took a pulse of the community in a poll, and 80% of those polled thought that she did deserve a new trial.
But there's still some people who are very convinced of her guilt as well.
There certainly are.
All right, Paula, thank you so much. Larry Overton has been a single dad for the last 5 years. We'll hear from him when we come back.
Up next.
Are you haunted by the fact that you made the decision to drive him?
There's not a day that I don't think about those things and wonder, could I have done something different?
That's next.
I still grieve, and I will. I don't think that'll ever stop. I don't think a mother ever stops grieving for her child that's gone.
That was Hannah Overton, who's serving a life sentence without parole for the murder of her foster son, Andrew. She maintains her innocence. Meanwhile, her husband, Larry, is on his own, raising their 5 children between the ages of 5 and 13 by himself.
I don't know how we've made it this long and this far, but we have. I've had my moments of being overwhelmed and feeling like I can't do this anymore. It took me about 3 years before I could even sleep in our room again, and it's been tough. I don't know that you get used to it. I think you get numb to it.
I miss her a lot. There's little things that most people take for granted, like getting to hug your mom and helping you with homework and stuff. I miss when she used to tuck me into my bed every night and how she used to play with me.
I get 3 contact visits with her, which means that I can sit across the table from her and hold her hand. But the kids can only talk to her through bulletproof glass and over telephones. It sometimes works, sometimes don't.
Isabel is getting to that age where she's starting to grow into a young woman, and I'm missing that.
I can't grow up the same. She taught me how to do my hair, and I had to teach Emma how to do her hair. It's just, I kind of have to do some of my mom's job.
She needs her mom.
She does.
How do you cope with that?
Well, some days are better than others. We do what we can when she's here. I've had a lot of really sensitive talks through the telephone.
It's been tough. I'll get through tomorrow. And I'll get through the next day. When we got married, I promised to love and to cherish her till death do we part, and I am bent on keeping that promise to the Lord.
What do you have to say about your husband, Larry?
He's a gift from God. He is amazing. And I can't even begin to express how wonderful he is and how wonderful that is, that how he stood by me and just never even thought twice about the commitment that we made to each other.
Larry Overton, it's just such an unbelievable story. Let me start by asking you a very simple question. How are you doing?
I'm okay. We're doing well as a family. We're hanging in there. We're sticking together.
5 kids, all by yourself. I mean, emotionally and financially, the pressure must be really unbelievable.
It is. It has been overwhelming at times to wake up and to try and fix hair and get out the door and get kids to school and then get myself to work and then get off work and pick up kids and get them in bed. It has been overwhelming at times.
What is the most challenging part for you?
I think initially I would have thought that it would have been maintaining that relationship with my wife, but it actually hasn't been. It's been just actually finding enough time to get rest for myself so that I can be there when my children or my wife need me.
You talked about maintaining your relationship with your wife. I know you drive 10 hours round trip every Saturday.
Yes.
To see Hannah, and your kids go with you about once a month.
Correct, yeah.
Those visits must be so emotional. I know they last about 2 hours. You can once in a while, I guess, actually be with Hannah. You're allowed to hold hands. But the kids aren't allowed to hug her or be with her in any physical way?
No, they do not get contact visits. I get 3 contact visits a month, which means that I can give her a kiss when I get there and hold her hand. The kids, because of her charge, involved a child. She's not allowed contact with children, so all of her visits with the children actually have to be through bulletproof glass.
Is it pretty traumatic for them?
It was really... I think we've settled into this is the way our life has been over the past couple of years. Initially, it was pretty hard, and they still have those days where they just need a hug from their mom, and trying to do that through glass just doesn't cut it. Looking back on that day that Andrew died,
Are you haunted by the fact that you made the decision to drive him to get medical help and that you didn't call 911?
I think we always second guess when you look at the way you deal with things when something doesn't go right and think, I could have done this, I could have done something better. But I think the end result would have been the same. There's not a day that I don't think about those things and wonder, could I have done something different? But ultimately, I did feel that I could get him there as quick or quicker than getting an ambulance to the house and getting him medical aid.
The prosecution talked about sort of bizarre circumstances at your house. Mm-hmm. And of course, you know about this very well. The fact that Andrew's mattress was outside, the fact that his sheets had been burned in your family grill, the fact that there was a camera above his bed. And I know that you and your wife say this stemmed from his behavior, but there is an explanation for all these things. Can you explain?
Yeah, his mattress, he had actually defecated on it and had smeared it. So the reason his mattress was in the backyard was because I had taken it out there, I'd cleaned it and left it out there to dry. And the security camera was because of the car accident that my wife was in prior to Andrew's death. She was spending a lot of time in her bed.
She was actually pregnant, and they had said that she needed to be on bed rest.
Correct. Yes, she was on bed rest. So I had gone with a friend and purchased just a small little monitor security camera, and we had put it up in the boys' room.
And then the sheets, I guess you would bundle them up in a trash bag, and that didn't seem to be sufficient?
Yeah, I had from when he had made a mess, and I had bundled them up into a trash bag and put them into the trash, and he continued to pull them out. So honestly, in my frustration, I burned them on the barbecue pit. But we did have an identical set of sheets for him. So
I know one of the things that prosecutors talked about as well is some interviews that were done with a couple of the kids talking about putting spicy things in their mouth. And later Hannah said that sometimes to discipline the kids or to punish them or to teach them a lesson, you all would take a pepper flake and put it on their tongue.
Yes.
And that sounds fairly unconventional. Tell me why you would do that.
My wife had gone through it when she was babysitting her youth pastor's children, had gone through a program that they were using with their children, and that was one of the suggestions that was in that book. So it kind of just stuck with her when we got married, and that would have been something that we had used with our children off and on.
Well, we're going to hear from your 5 kids in a moment. That's right after this.
Up next.
How do you explain to your kids where their mom is?
It's like your mom always helps you with your homework. I've just really missed that.
That's next.
And we're back with Larry Overton, whose wife Hannah is currently serving life behind bars for the murder of her foster son Andrew. Larry and Hannah's children are also with us. Isaac, Isabel, Allie, Sebastian are all here. 5-year-old Emma is backstage. She just wasn't feeling it, which you can understand. For a 5-year-old, this is probably a little bit overwhelming. But Isaac, let me start with you. You're 13.
Yes.
Tell me about your foster brother Andrew.
Well, he basically was a normal kid. He loved to have fun. He loved to play outside. He was just a normal kid. So,
having said that, do you remember anything? It's probably hard for you to remember because It was 5 years ago, but do you remember anything about his behavior that seemed unusual?
A couple things, yeah.
Like what?
Like the different things he would eat. Like he would just, and then the fact that he would eat a lot. But I never really thought about it and paid much attention to it.
He would have been 10 now, and I know you still think about him.
Yeah.
You have a picture of him beside your bed, is that right?
Yeah.
And Isabel, for you, you are 11 now, right? So you started middle school this year? Yeah, so it must be hard to be in middle school without your mom, is it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What's the hardest part?
Probably just having to go through all that stuff of growing up and her not being here.
And also, I think you've kind of had to take on a role as a little mom for your siblings. As the oldest daughter, you've had to help your dad out a lot. How do you explain to your kids where their mom is? I mean, obviously, you had to explain this 5 years ago.
Yeah.
But what do you tell them?
It's just, day doesn't go by that I don't talk about their mom in some way. We pray for her every night, that God would keep her safe and bring her home. And, just keeping her as a part of the life, of our life, and as much as possible, and letting them know that she is still a part of our lives.
I know that she does a lot of things in prison for the family, right? Allie, what kinds of things does your mom do?
Well, she helps us out sometimes with school. It's kind of hard for that.
How does she do that?
Well, we talk about it and she explains some things, and then she helps plan birthday parties, and so.
And what, like Halloween costumes? Does she help you with those?
Yeah, she helps us with that. She helps us find ideas, and she sends us pictures of some things that she finds on magazines that she thinks might be good.
I know how much she misses all of you, and she's also missing some really meaningful milestones in her children's lives. One of them, I think you actually reenacted for her, and that had to do with Emma.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, when Emma was taking her first steps, my wife was still in county jail, and in county jail, we were able to go outside of the prison, and she could see us on the street. So when Emma was taking her first steps, she took those in front of the prison under a street light so my wife could watch.
You guys are really trying hard to live without your mom. Isaac, what is your biggest hope? If you could wish for anything, what would it be?
Well, I think that one of the things that I've missed the most is just that we're homeschooled, so she would teach me, but even if we weren't homeschooled, it's still like your mom always helps you with your homework, and she hasn't been able to do that, and it's been really hard because I've just really missed that, and I can't wait till she comes home so she can help me with that.
Do you have faith that she will come home?
Yes.
All of you? Yeah, is that what gets you through?
Yeah.
Well, up next, could Hannah's conviction be overturned? We'll get some legal opinions when we come back.
Up next.
They didn't call 911 and chose to drive him to get medical attention, that was the basis of a life sentence. Does that seem crazy to you?
Well, look, I mean, the theory is that she would have known that the child would die.
That's next.
Why didn't it occur to you to call 911? I mean, that just seems like the automatic thing.
Hannah Overton remains in prison hoping to overturn her murder conviction. Her lead appellate attorney, Cynthia Orr, is here with Hannah's husband, Larry. Cynthia, why are you convinced of Hannah's innocence?
Katie, there's not one bit of evidence that points to Hannah's guilt. We're absolutely convinced of that. There was no competent scientific evidence at her trial, and the opportunity was missed terribly to adequately inform the jury of the scientific evidence that proves her innocence.
What is that evidence that proves her innocence?
Well, two things that were critical. One was the trial lawyers were unaware that the state had young Andrew's vomit, the first vomit, that he went to the emergency room, which absolutely proved that the sodium level in his stomach was not high, meaning that their theory that Hannah somehow attacked her son and forced salt down his throat was false, demonstrably false. The tragic other half of that goes hand in glove, is they failed to put on Dr. Michael Moritz, the world's expert on hypernatremia, on salt intoxication.
But Dr. Moritz, who is an expert on salt poisoning, the national expert, was able to testify in this second evidentiary hearing.
That's right.
And when he did testify, the judge still said he would not recommend a retrial.
Well, that's right. We're fortunate in one thing. It wasn't the judge's decision to make. Many lawyers in Texas have an abiding concern that these elected judges are concerned about appearing soft on crime. What Judge Longoria did, though, was issue a recommendation that really left it open. He found that all of our witnesses were credible, Katie. He found that he believed what Dr. Moritz had to say, but he fell short of recommending that Hannah get relief.
You also contended that Andrew had an eating disorder called pica. What evidence did you have of that?
Well, it's clear from his behavior, the fact that he ate inedible, non-nutritive things, cat food, dog food, glue at the Sunday school classes. Every adult that cared for this child observed this behavior.
He also had scratches and bruises all over his body, I think, which the prosecution used to illustrate their contention that Hannah was somehow abusive.
And the very reason that the emergency doctors missed the diagnosis as well, continued to give him sodium for an hour and a half before they determined he had hypernatremia. This high sodium, Dr. Moritz, if he'd been called to testify, would have told the jury, causes the blood to stop clotting. And so with a child like this, any scratch, any minor injury is going to bleed. And not only that, any sort of slight bump is going to cause bleeding under the skin, which results in bruising. So you can imagine, with the heroic life-saving efforts being made with Andrew, he was being more than bumped and scratched and moved. He had tubes, he had clips, he had CPR being done, and everything was bruising him and scratching him. So the doctors who didn't understand it thought they were seeing an abused child, and they weren't.
Do you believe that the Court of Criminal Appeals will side with you and ask for a retrial?
I'm very hopeful they will. I'm very optimistic that we'll get relief in this court.
Dan Abrams is the legal analyst for ABC News. He's been following the case. Dan, in layman's terms, what happened here?
Well, you had a bad defense. Things that they should have done that they didn't do, things that they did do that they shouldn't have done, a very aggressive prosecution going for the maximum possible charge that they could go for. But one of the really interesting things here is the theory of the case. The prosecution's theory was force-feeding, right? They argued at trial that this child was literally force-fed all of this salt. That's not, in the end, what the jury found. The jury was offered two possible theories here, and the jury didn't accept that theory and instead found her guilty because, in essence, she didn't get him help fast enough. So that in and of itself, I think, poses questions about the prosecution's theory in this case and how aggressive they were in pursuing that particular charge.
It just seems strange because they didn't take Andrew or didn't call 911 and chose to drive him to get medical attention, that was the basis of a life sentence. Does that seem crazy to you?
Well, look, I mean, the theory is that she would have known that the child would die by not getting help faster. That's the legal theory here. But again, that's problematic considering that's really not what the heart of the prosecution's case was. The heart of the prosecution's case was that the child was force-fed this salt. And so, yeah, that's a real problem, a real concern, a real issue here.
And what's next?
Well, the Court of Appeals now has the case. But I think there's a real shot here that the Court of Appeals will either order a new trial, or literally find her not guilty. There are three options: not guilty, new trial, uphold the conviction. Either of those first two would certainly be a win for her. The biggest win, of course, would be if the Court of Appeals orders her freed.
Hannah's family and defense attorney believe Andrew's death was caused by a rare disorder called pica. What exactly is that? We'll find out when we come back.
We were stuck in traffic and we couldn't get to the urgent care center, so he was honking the horn and screaming and trying to get through, and I was doing CPR.
Hannah Overton says she was wrongly convicted of killing her foster son, Andrew. Her new defense team claims an eating disorder called pica is to blame. ABC News Chief Health and Medical Editor Dr. Richard Besser is here. Dr. Besser, I know you've never treated Andrew, you never saw him, so we should make that clear. Having said that, there's no proof that he had pica, but there are suspicions that he did have this eating disorder. What is it exactly?
Well, you know, it's an unnatural craving for a non-food source. So you can see it in people who have nutritional deficiencies, you can see it in people who have developmental problems, but they may crave things like ice or dirt or clay or things like cigarette ash or laundry starch, and they'll want to eat that, and it can be very hard to keep them away from what they're interested in. One of the things that causes pica is iron deficiency anemia. So that's the most common cause in children, and they'll often want ice or they'll want dirt, and even in adults, pregnant women can have that. But the other group that has this is children who have developmental problems, and sometimes children with severe emotional deprivation.
I know that the official cause of death was salt poisoning, so eating salt, does that fall into the category of sort of a strange predilection for these kinds of foods?
You know, I'd never heard of salt being a target for pica, but in looking into the medical literature, there are reports of that. And salt, taking in too much salt, can actually be quite dangerous and deadly.
How does it kill you, salt poisoning?
Well, our bodies regulate salt very precisely. And if you take in too much salt and it rises in your blood, that can cause bleeding in your brain, seizures, coma, and death, and it can be extremely hard to treat.
Any warning signs for this other than the obvious behavior?
Well, you know, children up until age 2 will put everything in their mouths. Children, as they get older beyond that, they'll start to move away from that. So you want to watch to see if your child continues to explore the world solely with their mouth. That can be a sign of pica.
Keith Ayub, meanwhile, is the Associate Professor of Pediatrics at the Albert Einstein College of Medicine. And Keith, again, you have never treated Andrew, but I understand that you work with a lot of foster kids. And in this particular population, you have seen several cases of pica, is that correct?
I've seen numerous cases of pica, and we got so many reports. We actually did a published paper about this a number of years ago. And when I was contacted about Andrew, I actually asked your producer, I said, does he do this, does he do this, does he do this? And he ticked every box. So this was not a situation that I have not seen before. Salt, yes, I haven't seen that. But whereas pica is usually a condition where a child goes for a particular non-food item, Andrew seemed to be going for everything, and he wanted to eat voraciously. And I have seen kids who will eat voraciously without, you know, almost to the point of vomiting, and they don't seem to gain a lot of weight. We called it in our paper non-obese hyperphagia. Hyper meaning too much, phagia meaning eating.
It's almost like they don't have something in their brain that tells them to stop eating, that they are satiated?
Exactly. And we sort of got together the common factors of this, and what we found was that all these reports were coming from foster parents. And I did this with my colleague, Dr. Ruth Kaminer, who's a wonderful developmental pediatrician. So we both saw these kinds of patients. Foster parents were giving us these reports, and when we got histories on the mothers were always, there is a history of maternal substance abuse during pregnancy.
Well, it's interesting because Andrew's mom was a meth addict.
Exactly. And we also found that these kids had a lot of behavior problems, most commonly aggressive, destructive, and socially withdrawn behaviors. So hearing about Andrew's behavior did not surprise me at all.
Well, Keith Ayub and Dr. Richard Besser, thank you both so much for your insights. It's a very, very strange disorder that I think a lot of people have never heard of before. And we'll have much more when we come back.
People magazine raves Katie is a big, impressive production.
Do you feel sexier today than when you were 20? No.
With major gets.
I'm just very shy, but I'm also from Brooklyn.
And People calls Katie nearly supremely talented.
That's real exclusive out there.
Katie.
Guests of Katie stay at the legendary Algonquin Hotel, a New York City landmark, steps away from Times Square and the Theater District in Midtown Manhattan.
We've spent the last hour talking about the case of Hannah Overton, who says she was wrongly convicted of murdering her foster son, Andrew. It has raised so many questions, we thought we would take a few from our audience. What's your question?
I'd like to know, how come the juror's choice was either freedom or life imprisonment?
That's an excellent question. Cynthia, can you address that?
I can. There came a time in the trial when the issue of submitting lesser offenses to the jury came up. And just prior to this trial, the law was that if you asked for that, you couldn't appeal your conviction of that lesser offense. Hannah wasn't guilty of anything, and she wasn't about to do that. Unfortunately, the law had changed, and she wasn't put in that Hobson's choice, but she thought she was.
Do you think she regrets not going for a lesser charge?
I think looking back on it, she would say, I don't want to be away from my children a single day. My heart's breaking. But I think back at that time, she wasn't going to accept anything because she hadn't done anything wrong.
Let's go to another question. We have another question from our audience.
Yeah, I wanted to know why Hannah had to give the young boy so much of that spice. Zatarain, correct.
The Creole spice?
Yeah, she gave him, I think, twice. She kept putting that spice on his food.
She gave it to him once in his soup, correct?
She did. She
and
gave
then later in a sippy cup. Why was that?
Right. She was trying to flavor the water because he'd had so much to eat. She didn't want to give him more to eat and let him get sick. And so she wanted to flavor the water so maybe that would satisfy him. But she just put a sprinkle in, and he wasn't satisfied with it and threw that down. So.
Larry, when you told me how Andrew would overeat, and sometimes eat to the point of throwing up, eat strange things. Was this kind of a routine thing that you all would do with this particular spice?
At that point, we were trying to kind of curb his desire for food, and we were just trying different things. So with that particular spice, no, that wasn't a long-term thing that we had been doing with him. It had been done to see if it would satisfy him.
Any other questions from the audience? Yes.
Hi, I was just curious as to how much salt do you need to intake to have that salt poisoning with a child? Is it a tablespoon, a half a cup,
Paula?
2 cups?
Well, Hannah said that she gave him no more than 1 teaspoon of the Zatarain's Creole seasoning. And according to the medical professionals that we've talked to, they said she would have had to have given him 22 teaspoons of the Zatarain's or 6 teaspoons of salt in order for him to develop those symptoms and eventually die.
Hi.
What did the prosecution say her motivation was when she just didn't have to go through with the adoption? She didn't have to kill him.
Well, that was really the funniest part of the case, and not in a ha-ha way. I think they just cooked up this idea that somehow Hannah snapped, and if you'd met Hannah, you would know she's the most docile person, the most loving mother. She loves children, the more the merrier, and Larry's the same way.
And I think we have another question in the front row.
I was just curious. They said that she was pregnant and bedridden and had been in a car accident. And was she actually physically able to have force-fed him the salt?
Larry?
I think the defense's theory was that she had 3 hands to do that. So physically that way, no. And she's 5'2" and about 110 pounds. So she's not a very large woman. So physically, no, I don't see her being able to physically force that upon him at that time.
And Katie, the experts will tell you that if you do force feed a child salt, they tend to have bruises and scarring, etc. It's not easy to do. You will have resistance on the part of the child, which was also one of the key points the defense is making now.
In fact, you're nodding your head in agreement.
Yeah, there would be other signs, as you said, Dan, and Andrew was caught near the pantry with all the baking supplies and things like that, and there was it seemed to be that there was plenty of opportunity for him to get into things that contain sodium and salt, such as baking soda and, packets of salt and other seasonings and things. So I did not get a feeling of force feeding on this, from what I have read at least.
And you also have to look at someone's personal track record as well. Here's a woman that not only was she bedridden and 6 months pregnant and wearing a neck brace, but she had no history of violence. She had no history of mental health issues. She didn't even have so much as a speeding or a parking ticket on her record.
So when you talk about your Hannah being asked to be on bed rest, and she's pregnant and she's got all these kids, how was she able to cope with taking care of them after being in this car accident? Because at the time they were all very young.
Yeah, well, we were actually blessed. We had members from our church that would come by and check on her. We live next door to one of our closest friends, and she was checking on my wife during the day too. So it wasn't just literally my wife home with our children. She had people in and out during the day making sure she was doing okay and the kids were doing okay.
Do you ever regret, Larry, bringing Andrew into your home?
No, not at all.
You never think, gosh, maybe we shouldn't have taken this little boy on?
No. He had his issues and his problems, but, ultimately, I know in my heart that my wife and I both loved him, and we gave him the best home that we could, and he felt a part of that. Our kids remember him and love him as their brother, even though we never officially got to adopt him into our family.
And we'll be right back. We may never know the full story of how 4-year-old Andrew Bird died. In the meantime, a mother who claims she loved him remains in prison and awaits her fate, and a community remains divided. What do you think happened? Let us know. You can go to katiecouric.com and weigh in. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.